During the BP oil spill, I've heard a lot of people say, why isn't the government doing anything? And to me, this is an extremely odd reaction because it assumes that the U.S. federal government exists to protect people from problems and is capable of doing something. What are the biggest parts of the U.S. federal government? Welfare and the Army. Medicare, Medicaid, income security, Social Security. The Army prevents other states from entering their claimed territory and taxing you instead of the U.S. state. This is never something that is voted on. The weapons for this military are made by companies that get government contracts. The U.S. military doesn't make its own weapons, it's all contracted out. The U.S. government doesn't make its own highways, that's all contracted out. Construction of government buildings are contracted out. The training of teachers is contracted out. Textbooks are bought from contracted companies. Now, it is true that these companies would not exist if not for the state, but they're not agencies of the state. That is, the state itself is not producing all of these things. All of these things that you see, that you ascribe to the state cannot produce that. And so there's this oil spill, and people say the government needs to do something. Do what? All the state can do is raise taxes and push money around. They don't have any special engineering capability to stop the oil leak. And as for the oil itself, sure, it's bad, but which state should spend how much to clean it up? How much should Mexico spend? Should Britain spend? Should the U.S. spend? Should Cuba spend? How exactly is BP spread around all over the world? I know a bunch of short-sighted people will say, make BP pay for it all, and of course, not only is this impossible, BP doesn't have the funds to do that, but I don't think it's totally fair, though fairness is subjective. There will be oil spills. Why was this oil spill so bad? Because it was so deep. It was so deep, made it hard to repair. Why was BP drilling so deep? Because of environmentalists forcing oil companies to go deep. Sarah Palin made this argument and then got attacked for it and called an idiot. And I don't see what's wrong with this argument. I am assuming that it is cheaper and quicker to get oil from shallow areas from land, and that the reason oil companies aren't drilling there is because of environmental controls and what I might call and environmental controls that are motivated not so much for the environment, but because of NIMBY. Not in my backyard. They don't want that oil rig in view of their beachfront condo, and so they'll support environmental controls, not because they care about the environment, but because they care about their view. Anyway, but just because Sarah Palin says it doesn't mean it's wrong. And BP, the company, of course, did lots of things wrong. Because they're releasing the oil rig, Deepwater Horizons, at $500,000 a day, they rushed the cement wall lining of the well lining of the thing that goes down into the thing. Yeah, technical terms. They knowingly used a faulty blowout preventer, and the cutting tool for the well that was supposed to drill in case something went bad wasn't strong enough to cut through 10% of the pipes, and the blowout preventer had a dead battery. But this component was tested right. Well, BP falsified the blowout tests. And proximate to the blowout, the rig managers didn't take the problem as seriously as it turned out to be, or they didn't shut it off when they could have, or well, I'll link to something that talks about that. I'm not too interested in the specifics. The general story I'm getting is that Deepwater Horizons was like the Titanic. Now, companies are profit maximizers, and they will do what they do to earn the most profit. They are not interested in benefiting the public per se, but I make the case that on a free market they will end up benefiting the public. This oil is going out all over the ocean, and who owns this ocean? That is to say, what agency has the ability to exclude any activity from this ocean? Why, the U.S. federal government. And how did our supposed protectors take precautions against this? Well, BP was given a categorical exclusion from the National Environmental Policy Act, which means they didn't have to provide a detailed environmental analysis of their rig. Now, I'm not saying that the EPA needed to preempt things like this. I mean, there's no way the EPA could have predicted something like this would happen. Right? I'm not demanding them to have a crystal ball. But to grant an oil rig a categorical exclusion from the National Environmental Policy Act is something positive. That is, they have to, they have to make an exception for this company. It was a conscious act to do it. If they had just done the default, which is to apply the same standards to all the other oil rigs to Deepwater Horizons, I'm assuming that these problems would have been identified. Now, I have no evidence for this, but I know somebody was bribed to give an oil rig an exclusion from regulations. These exemptions from the NEPA are normally for things like hiking trails and outhouses, not the equivalent of factories in the middle of the ocean. But I know that the market is going to get blamed, and there are going to be calls for the same agency that probably got bribed to be given more power over the oil production in the ocean, even when the market system of regulation is not even in place. 18 days before the Deepwater Horizons explosion, Obama said in a town hall meeting in South Carolina, defending his expansion of deepwater offshore drilling, quote, "It turns out, by the way, that oil rigs today generally don't cause oil spills. They are technologically very advanced, ... Even during Katrina, the spills didn't come from the oil rigs, they came from the refineries on shore." Close quote. Now, Republicans are going to try to blame Obama per se, and sure, Obama sucks, but the problem is that there is a single monopoly regulatory agency for environmental protection, and it got bribed by a company, which is just trying to earn profits, and they'll earn profits however they do. The solution is to have a system of private property in the Gulf of Mexico. Because let's just pretend for a moment that you had one company that owned the entire Gulf of Mexico. Just for simplicity's sake, let's say it's one company that owns the Gulf of Mexico. And was making a bunch of money off of tourists and fishermen. And let's say BP came along and tried to bribe that company for a categorical exception to environmental controls. That would be silly. There would be no point to bribe the owner of that ocean, or that area of ocean, because that owner would have to directly shoulder the cost if something goes wrong. But the EPA did not have to directly shoulder the cost. They got bribed, granted a categorical exception, and now the people who actually live around and depend on the Gulf of Mexico, they're the ones paying the price. The EPA doesn't have enough skin in the game. Now, I'm not advocating a single company own the entire Gulf of Mexico. I have no idea how many companies or agencies would end up controlling grids of water on the total market, but I do have a rough idea of how it would work based on how fishing works, and I'll link to an excellent article that talks about the privatization of fishing and how overfishing is prevented. Barack Obama says he will end the cozy relationship with big oil. Oh, what a visionary. What a man with a plan.